Hi everyone, now in the year 2021, as we all know how a lot of ways difficult last year was due to the whole pandemic deal. And because of the coronavirus, a lot of films got moved to this year. So to be completely honest, last year wasn't the greatest year for film and new films coming out, as our selection was a lot more limited compared to years previously and hopefully years in the future. But last year I was completely starving for content and I'd watch, anything that was coming out just to get my film fix. And because of this, there was a number of very good to great films that came out last year, so I thought I'd do my top 10 films of 2020. This includes obviously cinema releases, even though there wasn't that many this year, and streaming releases. And again, these are my personal picks. This is not necessarily the most best artistically accomplished films, but it's the top 10 that I enjoyed the most. So let me know in the comment section if you agree, disagree, and what your top 10 films were of last year as well, as I'd love to hear them. Number 10 is a film that came out early last year in January before the pandemic hit this country, and that is The Invisible Man, which is a reboot, I don't know, of the classic 1950s Universal sci-fi film. And it takes up a B-movie schlock premise and kind of upgrades it to a really satisfying and suspenseful thriller. That makes for a really great popcorn experience. I mean, I have some nostalgia for this film, as this was the last film that I saw in the cinema before all of it happened. And it's the perfect kind of midnight popcorn horror film that is very accessible. It's for mainstream audiences and is a crowd pleaser, but a very well made crowd pleaser. Elizabeth Moss is a great woman in peril. I think she's a tremendous actress in pretty much everything she's in. And unlike most kind of horror films or slasher films of this kind, usually the films are filled with kind of bad actors and cheesy performances. But Elizabeth Moss really sells kind of the terror she's in throughout the whole entire film, which makes you care a lot more about the protagonist of the film than most other horror films. What's also great about this film is the way a lot of the set pieces are shot. There's a lot of great sequences where the camera just holds on a wide and forces you to kind of assess what's going on in the scene. And sometimes, an oven hob will slowly turn or a window will slowly open, and obviously it's the antagonist. And overall, the handling of the villain, the Invisible Man, uses empty frames and the visuals to really sell the threat rather than, forced editing or soundtracks that tell you how to feel. It's also a subtly kind of fascinating post-Me Too movement film. There's a lot of subtext going on underneath the surface that kind of elevates it from just a good time at the films to a very kind of relatable film, I'm sure, to a lot of people. You'll understand what I'm saying, if you've seen it or when you see it. So, it's not a film that's changed the face of cinema. It's not like a groundbreaking film in any case, but it's just a really, really, really competently solid made horror film, which as a big horror movie fan, I'm always happy to see. Number 9 is Tenet. I previously did a review for Tenet when it came out in August, I believe. I originally gave it kind of 3.5 stars, and I basically depended my rating in terms of when I rewatched it, if it will grow on me, as a big problem with my original screening was the sound mix was so overbearing and compressed that you really struggled to hear the characters' dialogue and the exposition scenes, which with a film with such a complex plot, you really need to hear the character explain the plot to you, which you literally could not most of the time in the cinema. So while I admired it for a lot of things, I couldn't really fully give it an assessment until I rewatched it at home, which I have done. I have to say it's grown on me quite a bit. Rewatching it, a lot more things kind of made sense and made me go, okay, this is why they're doing this, which obviously helps an action, adventure, blockbuster, spy thriller, as this does. But I think a lot of people, and even including me, took it in the wrong way, as this is Christopher Nolan at his most kind of strangely relaxed. Like, usually a lot of his films are overtly philosophical, and sometimes the characters can give empty platitudes, to each other and to the camera, which makes the film seem forced and falsely elevated in terms of what it is. But despite how complex the film is structured, this is kind of just a great throwback spy movie to the 50s and 60s, especially James Bond. You can't help but think this is the closest Christopher Nolan will do to make his James Bond, which he always kind of wanted to do. And as a big James Bond fan, it was kind of a luxury to see a film, especially this year, that is so globe-trotting, so big, so extravagant, so action-packed. In a year where most films couldn't really get to that level because most big $102 million budget films were pushed back a year, and which only made Tenet stand out that much more. And it's also nice for Nolan to be a bit more, on the lighter side with, charismatic performances who dress like superbly well and, a pure escapist film, which sometimes, I love Nolan, but one criticism I have is that he can take himself a little too seriously, especially for the genre films he's making. But he seems kind of more comfortable in his own shoes in this one. And obviously, like most Nolan films, the forward momentum and the pacing is, impeccable. That's one of Nolan's strongest suits. Every single scene just enforces the one that came before it and the one coming after it, which makes the whole thing just very leisurely paced. And for a 2.5-hour film, it goes by really quickly. And I have to commend also how complex the structure is. And from a second watch, it didn't make 100% sense, but it made a lot more sense than the screening I saw previously, which, you can't sometimes be really impressed with how it all kind of connects together and how ambitious the mechanics of the plot are compared to pretty much any other American mainstream blockbuster director is giving you. So yeah, Tenet, I really liked it, grew me on a rewatch, and I wasn't surprised if it grows on me even more on a third rewatch. Number 8 is a little gem that I saw earlier last year called Black Bear, starring Aubrey Plaza. That's the one. I know films. This was a really, really interesting film. Very much in the vein of Mulholland Drive in terms of its theme and its structure, which Mulholland Drive is one of my favourite films, so anything that is inspired by it is going to connect to me. And the film is kind of a drama and a thriller at the same time. It's kind of hard to classify what genre it even is. But overall, it's kind of a criticism and evaluation on the sacrifices people make to personal relationships in the vein of art, which is a concept that I quite drift towards, as I find the connection of, what people do in their lives to attain artistic achievements is something that, artists from directors, writers, painters, musicians, have to go through. And this film really assesses that sacrifice. The film is split into two sections. The first half, the second half are vastly different in tone. The first half is very kind of claustrophobic, very anxiety-inducing, very awkward. It's basically three characters in a cabin, a director, an actress, and the director's wife. And it's pretty much a free-hander, and it's almost like a play almost, with really great performances and sharp cutting dialogue as they all just dress each other down as the first half goes along. And then the second half switches it. It's the same three characters, but introduces a whole entire film crew, and they're making a film within this cabin, and the film turns into a lot more kind of energetic, busy, and very chaotic film, which contrasts, but in the same way, and keeps the same anxiety-inducing tone as the first half, and tells a very separate story that somehow connects to the first one, even though the actors are the same, the characters are different. It's very hard to explain with you haven't watching it, but for those who are in or have a fascination of the film industry and how kind of messy a lot of it can go, it's a very, very thrilling and at times really funny watch. And also very thought-provoking, as the film doesn't really give you a lot of answers into what it's actually about, but it's almost like a puzzle box, kind of a lot like Mulholland Drive, where if you think about it, hours after the film, you start to piece together the little clues the director gives you in terms of what the story is telling. And it makes it for a really intriguing and thought-provoking watch. That is also a very easy watch, as the film's nail-bitingly awkward tone. It's hard to take your eyes off, even though sometimes you want to cover your eyes because it is so cringe-inducing at times. So the first three in my mind are, very good films, number 10, number 9, number 8. But from here on out, I think is where the truly great films come in. And number 7 is a truly great film called Lovers Rock, which is directed by Steve McQueen in his Small Axe series he did for the BBC. I believe he did 5 films, all about black culture in the UK. And you can stream them all now on BBC iPlayer, and the one to watch is definitely Lovers Rock. That basically It's a very short and sweet 70 minutes, and the whole duration of the film takes place at this house party in London in the 1980s, and it's very much a slice of life, naturalistic film. You know, there's not an obvious three act structure or clear character arcs. It's very much a vibe film, which when they're done right, I really enjoy. What I love about this film is how it immerses you at this house party. They play great reggae music all the way through. How Steve McQueen uses the camera as almost a participant in the party. There's not a lot of, wides on tripods to give you a great scale. Usually you're very much in the midst and in the middle of this house party and this crowd. And when the dance sequences happen in these really impressive long takes, in terms of how busy the set must have been, of how all the actors were very much close together, dancing and talking and smoking, and you very much feel a part of this very smoky, very sweaty house party, which, considering we weren't pretty much allowed house parties at any point last year, is pretty much the closest thing I came to such an occasion, and made you yearn and miss for them beautiful, chaotic, lively social occasions that this film depicts. But it's the subtleties that make this film really pop. Basically exploring how all these people at this party live very kind of deprived, impoverished lives, and essentially this house party is their way to escape their normal lives for just a few hours on a Friday night. And I think a lot of people can relate to that same social situation. So there is clear character and story being told, but again, like these slice of life films, it's very kind of under the surface. What it mainly wants you to do is feel very much a part of these people's lives and this house party, which for this year, for last year, was very welcome. I really recommend it, especially if you like dub reggae music, as the music selection and the needle drops, for someone who hasn't really explored reggae music that much, was almost a great education to the appeal. So yeah, I definitely recommend Lovers Rock. Number 6 is Another Round, starring Mads Mikkelsen. This is a Danish film, basically about 4 teachers who are quite miserable at their jobs and decide to do a social experiment where, after a night of heavy drinking, they decide to keep their alcohol blood level at 0.5 every single day. So every single day in the morning they'll have 1 or 2 glasses of whatever their preference of alcoholic beverage would be, and try and maintain that day after day, as they think it will elevate not only their work performance but their lives, as they'll be a lot more open to experience, their senses will be heightened, and obviously as the film goes on it goes very much the wrong way, and they obviously kind of dip into alcoholism. Despite how kind of strange and dark the synopsis is for the film, it's almost a dark comedy. It makes you laugh as much as it makes you moved. The 4 main characters, especially Mads Mikkelsen, give very great performances, especially when they are intoxicated. Really precise movie acting for being intoxicated, as usually people drunk on camera in films and TVs are very unrealistic. But the drunk scenes were so accurate that you can't help but laugh and kind of associate it with other people or yourself who's been to that level. Especially when they're at school and they're slightly pissed. There's many great kind of comedy scenes that the film delivers. But as the film goes on, it slowly metamorphosizes from light comedy to heavy drama, very naturalistically and very fluently, which is very hard to do, to shift tone and genre with such kind of easy flow as this film does. And also the film's a very realistic portrayal of, alcohol addiction, where you start off just having these few crazy nights, and then all of a sudden you find yourself drinking more and more, and it becomes a very believable transition from these characters who didn't drink before to where they end up in the 3rd act of the film. And there's a lot of kind of narrative twists and turns on the way that keep you really engaged, and it's just a really pretty great film that I'd recommend. Number 5 is One Night in Miami, directed by Regina King, who makes her feature film directing debut here. She's an acclaimed actress who won the Best Supporting Actress award for If Beale Street Could Talk about 3 years ago, and also starred in acclaimed kind of HBO shows such as Leftovers and Watchmen. And here she makes an adaptation of a stage play that is basically takes place all in one night in this small motel room with 4 big kind of icons of the civil rights movement: Malcolm X, Cassius Clay, soon to be Muhammad Ali, Sam Cooke and Jim Brown. And essentially it's very stagey in its presentation, as most of it again is in one location with 4 characters just talking. But the script is so good and the actors are all tremendous. You can't help but think Regina King, being an actress herself, really knows how to communicate to her actors in her film. Drive these 4 great performances, which the film lives and dies on these performances being great, as that's pretty much all we're seeing throughout the film. And they are just that good to get you invested in every single character. And all 4 of the real life people the actors are portraying are, pretty larger than life and have huge legacies behind them, which is really tough to channel that heavy expectation in terms of the audience knowing who and how these real life people acted and spoke and what they thought, and really immersing you with the believability of the film. And essentially all the 4 characters talk about, the civil rights movement and the responsibility of each other's platforms, both politically, artistically, or in the sporting world, of how they can help the black community during the early 60s to have equal rights. And what puts this film above a lot of other political subtext films is that you have very varying opinions on how to approach such a thing. Obviously Malcolm X is very militant in his point of view, where Sam Cooke is more cooperative in his point of view. And you have these POVs clashing, which makes you agree and disagree with the characters as much as each other. There's no right or wrong opinion here. Each one of them have great points and also points you disagree with, which gives the film a sense of nuance and complexity that a lot of other politically charged films simply don't have. Usually you have one domineering point of view, meaning of the writer director, given to the audience, which is absolutely fine, but it's very refreshing to see a film with multiple points of view. The film can be really funny at times. The actor who plays Cassius Clay has got his mannerisms and his cadence down, which very much contrasts the very eloquent and well-spoken formal nature of Malcolm X, which gives the scenes a very kind of diverse energy. The film makes you assess and reassess your own opinions, which is, the sole focus of any film, I think. And also the dialogue is so snappy and so well written that the 2 hours just fly by despite the water bottle nature of the film. And obviously the subtext is very relevant to all that went on last year with the BLM movement. And it's fascinating and somewhat sad that these characters discussing, all their problems, nearly 60 years ago now, is still very much relevant today, but that gives the film its staying power. And it's a great, great debut for Regina King, and I'm very much excited to see what she does in the future. Number 4 is the documentary Feels Good Man. I already reviewed this last year. It's about the metamorphosis and transition from Pepe the Frog, the meme, to this kind of playful, harmless, innocent comic to this weird alt-right hate symbol, and kind of covers why this metamorphosis happened. Anyone fascinated by internet culture or meme culture should absolutely check out this film. It's probably the first great documentation of meme culture. And also one thing I forgot to mention in the original review is how much time the film spends with the original creator of the Pepe the Frog comic and his reactions to how something he created so innocently and pretty much for kids fell from his hands and kind of became this kind of vicious hate symbol, and his reaction to the whole thing and his attempts to kind of rectify the connotations of Pepe makes you really on his side and support, what he's trying to do. So great documentary. You guys should check it out or check out the review I did last year for it. Number 3 is American Utopia, which is a concert film on David Byrne's Broadway show he's been doing the last few years now. David Byrne, if you don't know, is the lead singer of the Talking Heads. And I'm a bit biased towards how much I love this film because I adore the Talking Heads. They're in my top 10 favourite bands of all time. And their original 1980s concert film, Stop Making Sense, is regarded by me and many others to be the greatest concert film ever made in terms of how it's shot, how it's structured, the performances on stage. And this almost feels like a sequel or a up-to-date version of that film, and potentially even surpasses it. The film is shot and directed by Spike Lee, which is a strange kind of partnership I didn't see coming, Spike Lee and David Byrne working together. But Spike Lee's decision to cover the film in very different ways. Sometimes he's on a road and the camera is dancing with the performances on stage. Sometimes he leaves just very kind of wide and static shots of the performance so you can get a grand kind of scope and scale of all the performances on stage. And Spike Lee does a really great job in covering this concert film, and kind of makes the most of the minimalism of how the stage and how the play is performed. And the performance on stage is highly commendable. All the instrumentation you hear from the film is being played on the stage. There's no backtracking, there's no dubbing, which makes the performance very organic, which in a lot of these concert films you do suspect how much post and post-production is giving you a synthetic version of the musical event it's covering. And David Byrne, who's in his early 70s here, is still great. He still maintains that kind of nervous vocal energy he had back in the late 70s, early 80s, which for a guy that old to maintain his singing voice is hugely impressive, and he's such a commanding stage presence still. And overall, despite the title, which you may think is kind of labelled in cynicism, it's a very kind of uplifting and optimistic view of humanity, which I think we really needed last year. And the positive energy the concert gives out is so infectious that you can't help but move to it yourself. I know I had to stop myself a few times. As you know, I didn't want to look like a maniac in my living room. But great stuff, and even if you aren't that involved or a fan of Talking Heads or David Byrne, I'd still give it a watch if you're a music lover, as it's one of the best music concerts I've seen in a long time, and I highly recommend it. Number 2 is Pixar's Soul. One of their more inventive, imaginative and creative films they've ever done. A film that I feel like will resonate a lot more with adults than children. The overall message of the film, I think, is very undersaid in a lot of media and needs to be said to a lot of people for them to kind of have a true look at their values and reassess and assess, what they want from them. I won't give it away, as I feel like that message is expressed so well in one of the best sequences Pixar's ever done. I won't give it away, but it's the scene with the main jazz musician at the piano near the end, which is completely tear-inducing. Such an amazing sequence. But there is stuff for kids as well, and there's stuff for the eyes, as the film looks absolutely exquisite. The film sequences that takes place, with the souls, is really psychedelic, very colourful, very surreal and abstract, which I love to see in a big budget mainstream animation film taking this left field approach to the visuals. But then the other half of the film that takes place in New York looks pretty lifelike at this point. Like, we're getting there where we're almost approaching Uncanny Valley territory, but just that step back so we don't kind of feel kind of strange, confused into what we're seeing. Like the lighting and cinematography, and even like the use of like depth of field and the clarity and sharpness of the animation, you can really spot the materials they're wearing and just look hugely lifelike, but still maintaining that fantastical, colourful, animated approach. So we're not just replicating real life. I don't see the point in doing that in an animated film. The film can be very funny, the film can be very life-affirming. The jazz sequences themselves are just complete eye candy. They're just, they look lovely. And Jamie Foxx, who I feel is a strangely unappreciated actor, he's a very successful actor, but people don't give him credit to how kind of likeable, how charismatic of an actor Jamie Foxx is. And he lends his voice to the main character here and does a splendid job. And definitely Soul is the film that we all needed last year to see, and it came out, I believe, around Christmas. And if you haven't watched it, I strongly recommend you do. And my number 1 best film of the year, and to me it was a clear number 1, not to discredit the films that came before, but this was the one, was The Sound of Metal, starring Riz Ahmed. Riz Ahmed plays this metal/punk drummer who suddenly loses his hearing out of nowhere, and basically because of this his career, his love interest, his whole life completely falls apart, and he has to slowly transition and relearn a new way of life pretty much. Great films to me, you should really feel the empathy for the main character. I believe Roger Ebert once said that movies should be empathy machines, and you really are placed in the shoes of the main character, and Riz Ahmed, who plays him, gives not only the best performance of his career, but the best performance of the year. I would not be surprised if he attains the Best Actor award at the Oscars. His expressions, his mannerisms, his reaction to this life-altering event of hearing loss is so believable, and so realistic that you would think it actually happened to him. The film's real power rests in its maturity. Nothing is played up in a very melodramatic way at all. The film is very realistic in terms of the events it's telling, and once again, that emotional maturity this film holds is so moving that by the end, when the credits rolled, I could not just stop staring at it, as I feel like I was transported to a whole entire different human person and living his life and feeling everything he's feeling, which is greatly helped by a lot of the sound design in this film. A lot of the time we shift to his POV and his hearing loss, which is not complete deafness, but obviously is so distorted that you can't really make anything out anyone's saying, which really helps you understand what the character is going through. And also the portrayal of the deaf community is so respectful, which I've never really seen explored in any film, that you're learning as the character is learning how to handle this new way of communication. And the film basically juggles of either transitioning to this new life that he's been forced in, or trying to still be on the other side of life that he once had, and basically stuck in this middle section in terms of his new life and his old life, and struggling to transition from one to the other, which makes the film very tragic. But also the film is all about acceptance and learning to grow, which the film connotes absolutely beautifully with such great clarity. No scene, no line of dialogue, no shot is wasted in this film. It all builds up tremendously to the overall story. And the film is 2 hours and 15 minutes, and it's every single minute of the film is necessary for either exploring character or furthering the plot. I believe this is the director's first film he's ever made, which, what a way to start off your film career. This very much reminds me of when Damien Chazelle made Whiplash, as his kind of breakout first film. This is a guy to watch, and that's why it's my favourite film of the year. You guys and girls need to check it out. So yeah, that's my top 10 films of 2020. Wasn't the greatest year for films, but I had to make do of what I was being given. And what I was being given, all these films I really enjoyed to completely loved, which, is not too bad a thing. Thank you guys for sticking around. I'll be doing a new video previewing 2021 in terms of all the films and TV shows that I'm looking forward to or not looking forward to. Hope you guys stick around for that. Like and comment and share this video as much as you can. I'd like to hear your opinions of your top 10 films, and I'll catch you on the flip side.